Now, in this video, we'll see some examples of questions on the use of the this keyword that you might be asked in a coding interview. I'll go step by step so we don't miss anything. In this question, we can see how the output is 3. Now, before we see where this value is coming from, let's see what we've got. First, we have a variable declared with var inside the global scope, so it means that its value will be assigned to the window object. And by the way, if we declare this variable using let or const, it will not. Then we have a function declaration, also inside the global scope, which uses the this keyword. Now this function, as we've seen in this series, is a method that belongs to the window object. So if we call this function right away, the this keyword will point to the window object. So it will return us the value of that variable. So it would be like saying this, window.callback, right? Then so far we can see how this value is not coming from that variable. So it's there just to confuse us. Now on the other hand, we have an object which has two properties. One has the same name as a property we've mentioned before, and the other one is a method. Now here's where it gets tricky. The instructions inside this method include a reference to a property inside the arguments object, and also an invocation on whatever value belongs to this reference, right? And we need to be aware that the arguments keyword returns an array-like object, so something like this. And this arguments object includes a length property by default. And this basically means two things. One, that we can access this property using an index value, as if it was an item inside a regular array. That's why the 0 inside the brackets. So we're referencing whatever value lives inside the property of the arguments object. And the second one is that we can use this reference to call, in this case, the functionality stored inside index 0, which is the function from above with the identifier callback. And why 3? Well, because the arguments object is a property inside any function object, and by default includes a length property. So the number of arguments that we have included inside the function when we call it. So if we include 10 arguments, the value will be 10. And don't forget that we're talking about number of arguments, not number of parameters, right? So if we do something like this, and then we call this function with, for instance, all these arguments, we get the value of the third argument in this case. So finally, what we're doing is invoking this method inside this argument object. This way, we make the this keyword point to the property length inside the arguments object. That's why we get 3, just because that is the number of arguments that we have included inside the function call. Now, this other example, it looks a bit like the last one, but is slightly different. First, we have a variable declared with a var keyword again, inside the global scope, so it belongs to the window object. And by the way, as a side note, the window object has indeed a length property that indicates the number of iframes inside the window. So we're actually overriding this property, just because we're using var. Then we have the same function declaration inside the global scope as well. So the this keyword inside this function points to the window object. And after that, we have an object with a property that uses the same length. And this method, as a single instruction, has the function invocation which refers to the function we have declared above. And in this case, it calls it right away. Now, the thing is that when we invoke this method, what we're doing is actually invoking the function that has been declared inside the window object. That's why the value of length that we can see in the console is the one that is inside the window object, the one that we have overridden. That's why if we declare the first variable using let or const, it will give us 0, in this case, which is the actual value of this property inside the window object. In this case, we have an object that includes a property and a method. And this method includes a nested arrow function. In both cases, it seems that we want to display the brand of the object itself. But will it give us the same output? In fact, it will, because as arrow functions don't have their own binding to this, and as it lives inside a regular function, it will point to the same value of the this keyword of its parent function. So the method displayed brand in this case. instead of pointing to the window object as we might expect. On the other hand, if we take a look at the object below, we can see how the method created with an arrow function points to the window object instead of the same object where it has been created. And obviously, if you change the return statements for console logs, it gives us the same output. So I'll just comment this out. Right? Now, if you recall from the lesson on arrow functions, I'll leave the link in the description down below, we've seen how methods created with arrow functions will always point to the window object, right? No matter how many nested objects they must cross. But in the case of functions, they just stay with the value of the parent function. In this case, first we have a function constructor that includes a parameter to place the value of the name property on whatever object we want to create, an expression, and a method, which in this case uses an arrow function, right? Then we're creating a new pet object instance using this constructor, and we specify the value of the name property that we pass as an argument inside this new object, so Fluffy. Now, in the first console log, we're calling the method on the new object. Then, using the structuring, we store the reference for that method, so the functionality of that function, inside the new variable, and then we invoke this functionality. Now, the this keyword inside the function constructor will point to the new object created. And as the method inside is created using an arrow function, the this keyword will point to the function constructor. Now, this new object will also have the method inside, of course, but as an arrow function has been used, the this keyword will point to the function constructor pet. Well, I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.